Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Sunday program on behalf of the Sousa Mendez Foundation. Can you believe it? We've been doing these programs for 6 years now, and our loyal audience, you keep coming and coming, and as long as you do, we will continue presenting you with inspiring, uplifting stories of rescue, resistance, and hope. We're also doing some in-person events. We've been busy this summer planning all kinds of stuff. We have an upcoming in-person event in October in Utah, in November in Connecticut, in November also in Berlin, and coming up in January in New York. And we will give you all of these details as the time approaches. So we've been busy bees here at the Sousa Mendez Foundation. Today we are presenting a unique story, and it's the story of Michel Cojot, who, well, there's no way to encapsulate his life, but BOAZ DVIR, who is one of our two honored guests, has made a brilliant movie about this man's story. We all know about the raid on Entebbe, and so he was one of the heroes of this story. But he had a first act that led to that second act in his life story. And we are very honored to have with us, so BOAZ DVIR, our filmmaker. We presented a previous film of his called A Wing and a Prayer. You can find that on our YouTube channel from a few years ago. A fascinating film about another unsung hero. That man was one of the founders. His name was Schwimmer, one of the founders of the Israeli Air Force, and it's quite a remarkable story. So we have BOAZ DVIR presenting this film. We also have with us Olivier Cojot Goldberg. He is the son of Michel Cojot. He was trained as an engineer. He is today a financial manager, splits his time between the United States, where he mainly lives, and France, where he's coming to us today. And he was there. He was there to witness his father's heroism. He was himself a hostage in the Entebbe raid. And so Olivier also is something of a hero of that Entebbe story, and we are so honored to have him with us. So without further ado, well, I'm sorry, but before I hand you the floor, BOAZ, I need to say you will have a lot of questions. You will remain muted, so you'll be asked to type your questions into the chat box. So please use that chat feature. And now I'm pleased to hand the floor over to BOAZ Chaim DVIR. BOAZ, take it away.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you, Matt and Mia, and of course, thank you, Olivier, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Here it's beautiful, so wherever you are, if you're taking the time to sit and talk to us, we appreciate it. We have screened this film officially really only twice so far in 2 film festivals, but we've actually, and this would be the 3rd time, but we've screened the rough cut many times in many places. And so I'll begin my talk with telling you a question that I'm always asked every single time. And that is, how did you find the story? It's such a mind-blowing story. How did you come upon it? And there is an interesting backstory to it. So when the raid on Entebbe happened, I was growing up in Israel in a little village. I was 9 years old. And I really took it to heart, not just, of course, the rescue mission, but that whole hostage crisis. I was a street kid. That's what we called it. I was outside all the time, playing constantly. But and my brother, who was a year younger, played out there as well. And we decided during that hostage crisis that we were going to ground ourselves in solidarity with the hostages. If they couldn't leave, we couldn't leave. So we stayed at home that whole week. And when the raid happened, we were thrilled, of course, that they were freed. We were also really happy to be back outside. actually. And you think, okay, fun to be inside. We didn't have the internet. We didn't really even have TV. There was only like one channel. It was black and white. It was mostly like educational. So, we mostly played games and read, but we were thrilled to be outside. And the raid ushered in many stories and lore and heroes. There were several heroes that emerged out of it, and one of them was Michel Bacos. Michel Bacos was the Air France captain. Why did he become a hero? Because he supposedly, during the hostage crisis, that wing-long hostage crisis, had a chance to leave with a release group. The terrorists released two groups, and the very first group was of mostly sick and old and young hostages, and the crew, including Michel Bacos and his 11 crew members, were given the opportunity to leave, and he said, no, we're staying here. So he became a hero, this French guy who decided to stay with the mostly Jewish passengers, and it just fascinated everybody, and he just became this mythical figure, for me too. Fast forward years later, I'm in Nice, France. I flew there purposely to interview him. I wanted to make a documentary short about his heroism. And I'm there in his apartment, and he's a great guy at the time, in his late 80s, really charming and just a nice guy and bright and eloquent. Everything you'd expect from a childhood hero, right? I'm thrilled. But halfway through the interview, as he is volunteering information, it hit me. It hit me. I'll never forget it. Like that moment. It didn't feel good either. That the whole story was a lie. It was all made up. It just became very clear to me. And during the Q&A, if you want me to give you examples of the type of information he provided that led me to that conclusion, I'm happy to do so. But it prompted me to ask more questions and get at it. And I knew when I left that he was not a hero and this was just made up, and I was duped. I wasn't sure what to do, so I decided to continue down the path of figuring out what actually happened and interview other former hostages, particularly key ones. And they verified it. Like, for instance, the flight engineer who was there with the captain. And himself, by the way. The flight engineer himself was knighted by France for their heroism. And I have him on camera saying, no, this never happened. We were never given the chance to leave, and therefore it's just made up. Others confirmed it. But the other hostages kept saying to me, yeah, okay, Michel Bacos was not a hero. But there was a hero there in Entebbe. He was French. His name was Michel Cojot. And I said, oh, tell me more. And I knew I needed to interview Olivier, and I was looking for him, and it's almost by divine intervention that a friend of his must have read a blog post that I put up or something. He came across me doing this project, contacted me, his name is Gary Korn, and offered to connect the two of us. So I connected with Olivier, and from that point on, we became lifelong friends, and I knew that this story had to be told, and the family was gracious enough to allow me to tell it and give me access to a lot of material, including in Olivier's Connecticut home, where I found Michel Cojot's old passports that showed him going to Caracas and Mexico City and Bolivia. And so the family really helped tell the story, and that's how it came about. A really interesting tale. Now, in the time I have, I want to share with you also some of the backstory, because that's what's interesting here, right? So continue down this path. Now you know how I came upon the story. What's been interesting also since then, as I mentioned, we show rough cuts of this film before the actual screenings for years, mainly on college campuses around the country. And it's really been fascinating, actually, to see the reaction. For example, I screened it at a major university. I don't want to give the name in this particular case because what I'm about to say might make them look bad. I don't know. I'd rather not. And it was packed with undergrads. There must have been about 100 undergrads there. Often I get plenty of undergrads, but not that many, like maybe 30 or 40. and the rest are professors and graduate students and community members. This was really packed by undergrads. They had tons of questions during the Q&A, and afterwards they stood in a long line to ask additional questions, which was amazing. And it was close to midnight, and the place was kind of emptying out on campus, and I saw two sheepish freshmen there. How do I know they were freshmen? I've been teaching for 22 years on a college campus, so and now I know, I know. These were freshmen, no question about it. And they came up to me kind of cautiously and said, like apologetically, we didn't know about this. And I said, listen, don't feel bad. There's a reason I made this documentary. It's an untold story. Even really like respected Holocaust scholars, even Entebbe scholars, have not heard about Michel Cojot, which they should, but they haven't. So don't feel bad. And they looked at me and they said, no, we didn't hear about any of this. Here were two freshmen at a major American university who were being introduced to the Holocaust for the first time. They'd never heard of the Holocaust. And it really affected me to hear that, and really, actually led me to create the Holocaust Education Initiative at Penn State, which is its own story. But it's one of the many moments that I've come across while showing this film. I've found that young people in particular are really drawn to the character of Michel Cojot, even more so than I do. I've spent now, a decade and a half with him, and he's a fascinating guy. Olivia, you mentioned this program honors heroes. Some people argue whether he was a hero, not a hero, because he's so complex, right? To me, he was, but, I can see where others say, well, maybe not, including some people who knew him. So, he's a complex guy, and he has really, no question, influenced my life. But I see the young people who watch his journey connect with it in a deeper manner than even myself, because they see in him a search for meaning that eluded my generation. I'm Generation X, and we just wanted to have fun and do well, but it wasn't a big deal. What I see with young people, it's not enough. It's not enough to be successful. They have to have an impact. They want to make a difference. They need meaning in their life. And that was Michel. So they really relate to him. And so I'll hear from students who watched this a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I'll hear about it many, many months later. And it fascinates me because they really feel like, oh, he maybe not a role model, but simply an example of someone who struggles in a way that gives them hope, because he does ultimately find some solace, right? Not completely, by the way. It's too complicated to have a completely, redemptive moment in his life, ever. Not even in Entebbe. But he simply, comes around and grows and overcomes. And that gives young people a lot of inspiration. So, for me, that's one of the more exciting aspects of now taking this film and showing it. We got several more film festivals coming up. Actually, many more. I can't even say the name of yet because the information is embargoed. But I can tell you, we'll be in New York, we'll be in Texas, Hong Kong, London, Nashville, Silicon Valley, on and on and on. Israel, we're going to be screening in Israel in a couple of places. So, yes, I think it's great for everyone to come see it. It's universal. But I'm particularly looking forward to interacting with young people all over the world and seeing. I showed this, I used to teach a summer course for the University of Florida at Columbia University's satellite campus in Paris. It's in Montparnasse. They have a satellite campus there, and they rent out the different facilities to other universities. So there's students from all over the country there in Paris. It's really fun. And I was teaching a class there. I had my own students, and I screened a rough cut of Michel Cojot Story. Wasn't even called To Kill a Nazi yet. It was just called Cojot. It was much shorter, but nonetheless, the main essence of it was there. And I screened it for the students. It was packed with students, and they watched it and talked about it. The next morning, I had to get up at 4:30 because I was taking my students from the University of Florida on a field trip. I was going to wake them up at 5:30, but I had to get everything ready. We were using camera equipment, making some, we were going to go on a shoot. These were journalism and film students. And I ran across a group of students that I recognized from Cornell University, about 5 or 6 of them. I saw them. They were sitting there at 4:30 in the morning, talking. And so I said, hey, good morning, bonjour. Are you guys also preparing for a field trip today? They said, no. We've been up all night talking about Michel Cojot. So I'm very excited to hear the questions you have. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt to play the trailer for you.
Où le hasard ou la destinée a voulu que je me retrouve à bord de cet avion d'Air France.
The plane takes off. And all of a sudden, somebody gets up and screams fire. And then you see 2 people who each have a hand grenade and a gun.
As most of those on board Flight 139 panicked, one passenger remained strangely calm. Michel Cojot, a French business consultant, harbored deep doubts about a decision he made the previous year. Michel was haunted by his father's disappearance during World War II.
Goldberg is put on a train going towards Auschwitz.
Le père de Michel mort à Auschwitz.
Michel identified the Gestapo officer who arrested his father.
Klaus Barbie, who was nicknamed the Butcher of Lyon, was the head of the Gestapo there.
Je me suis résolu de le rencontrer pour le tuer.
He would practice gun shooting in the backyard.
Et il dit cette phrase qui, moi, m'a beaucoup marquée. Klaus Barbie était là devant moi, je voulais l'assassiner.
C'est là qu'il a changé.
He grabbed the first plane he could find.
Michel flew to Tel Aviv with his 12-year-old son, Olivier.
They announced while we were in the plane that we were going to do a stop in Athens, in Greece.
Athens was known to be a very dangerous place.
The 1970s were the golden age of hijacking.
And our plane was hijacked to Entebbe in Uganda.
Michel viewed the hijacking as his once-in-a-lifetime second chance.
That's at the point at which Cojot steps forward.
Mais je dirais que Entebbe était fait pour des gens comme moi.
The Entebbe episode is a chance for him to do the right thing, but in a positive way, not taking someone's life, saving someone's life.
The raid of Entebbe is one of the most important special operations of all time, and Cojot was absolutely crucial to its success.
I was so shocked, and I knew this story.
C'était vraiment un extraordinaire clin d'œil de l'histoire.
So now really, to me, and I think for you too, the highlight of the program today, we get to speak with Olivier. Let me just say I've known Olivier now for 15 years, and he has been so supportive and helpful in every which way, like being here today is one of many examples. And I greatly appreciate everything that he has done and has continued to do. We couldn't tell the story without him, that's for sure. Now, Olivier, you were there for a lot of key moments. Let's talk about the obvious one. We might as well. What was it like for you to be in Entebbe, and what has it been like for you since?
Yeah, I have probably a little bit of a different perspective because, first there's the part when it starts. So, I often get this question, were you scared? Obviously, you're scared. And, one thing that I learned during this, these few days is you can't be scared all the time, actually. Fear goes away, and fear comes back when things get worse. So it's really the the variation of the level of events that, makes the fear come back. Otherwise, when it stays, you see you're alive, you're fine, it goes away. But I was a 12-year-old at first. In the beginning, for the first few seconds, I couldn't even believe it. So actually, what really triggered the fact that I believed what was going on is I don't think I had ever heard my father curse, actually. And when we saw the terrorists coming back with a gun and a grenade, he did say something that I won't repeat here, but I knew the circumstances had to be bad. So we spent, a little bit over a day, if I recall, in the plane. So first, the terrorists had to take control of the plane. And what they did is they had everybody move to the back seats of the plane. So even though the plane was full, they tried to put all the passengers in the last 20 or 30 rows. And then they separated basically people who had special needs. Like, for example, there was a very pregnant woman, or there was a woman who's in the picture you saw earlier who had a very young baby. So she was put in first class. But, me, basically, I think they separated me from my father. And at the time, I thought they're doing this so that when they'll ask questions, they'll be able to ask two people from the same family and see whether it's the same story or not. So I was moved to business class, which was great. But when I turned around, I could still see my dad because we happened to be in one of the first rows of second class. So then we went back to Benghazi to refuel. And that was pretty stressful because even though I was only 12, I knew Benghazi wasn't the most stable place. And actually, we were greeted at the time with, there were sort of cannons all along the runway. And we had circled the airport for a very long time until we basically ran out of fuel just because the government didn't want to let us land. And when we were out of fuel, they did let us land. There we refueled. I can mention a quick, sort of side story. The woman who was pregnant actually faked, with the help of a doctor who was inside the plane, faked having a miscarriage. And she was the first hostage that was let out. And she did already give information. The Israeli army did, meet with her and get some information. I only found out that it was a fake years after it happened because I saw it happen and I was convinced it was true. Then the plane took off and we went to Entebbe. We landed in Entebbe. And after waiting some more hours, basically we were freed and we were able to go to a terminal. So it was at the old terminals. It was no longer used for commercial purposes. One interesting fact was actually years before, Uganda and Israel were friendly, and the Israelis were the ones who built that hangar, which, we'll probably get to that point later on. When I was interviewed, before the raid, the army was able to show me plans of that terminal, which I was able to recognize. And so I'm sure that helped a lot. There was a set of circumstances that was helpful. So basically, we were all moved to that terminal. And there, you can start to see life as a hostage, how it starts. And, I often say, in a way, Entebbe was the last hijack of its kind. And I think the same way that, Israel learned a lot, the world learned a lot, but the terrorists also learned a lot. And in a way, I would say, this is going to sound a little odd, I'm convinced that these terrorists would have killed us, no problem, but they really had an objective in mind. And while we were there, for the most part, there was one German lady who was a little worse than the other, but they didn't want to purposely be cruel. So, they weren't that nice, but they weren't cruel either. And really, if I want to talk about my father and the role he played, so we go into this hangar and we're starting life. And him, just because he spoke English and French and Spanish, so there was one terrorist that was South American. Everybody called him the Peruvian, but he also spoke Spanish because we lived in Venezuela for a while. He took on this role to be the translator. So very quickly, there was a bullhorn, and he would be the in-between guy between the terrorists, the hostages, and, a few times Idi Amin came, he would be the in-between guy with Idi Amin as well. And then he took it upon himself at first just to try to make our life better, try to negotiate, some food, mattresses, malaria pills, whatever he could get. But after the initial one day, basically, I think my father engaged with BOAZ. So BOAZ was a young German guy, and I interpreted in a way he was a rebel without a cause. He was the son of a wealthy German industrialist, and he decided to, even though it wasn't really his fight, to try to further the condition of Palestinians. That was really his stated mission. And my father felt that this guy was intellectual enough and educated enough. He was trying to turn him, saying that history would look at him as a Nazi. Basically, you have a German guy coming back, getting, after Jews. And his answer was, hold on, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm not against Jews. I'm an anti-Zionist. And today Israel is doing to Palestinians something that shouldn't be done. And that was the fight. And basically, I think where my father helped a lot, there are really two key things that he did. But I think he managed to turn him to some degree. So he didn't completely turn him, but again, we're there. This is 1976. We're 4 years after the Munich terrorist attack, where Golda Meir said, Israel doesn't negotiate with terrorists. And, most of you know it didn't end up well for the hostages there. So, really while we are there, we're thinking Israel's going to have the same position. And we're all surprised when about after 4 days, Israel says that it's going to negotiate. And so there, the first move that my father made that really changed a lot of things is he went to BOAZ and he said, if you want to show the world that you're not a Nazi, you should release the non-Israelis. And after some negotiation, and I think BOAZ talked with the other terrorists, I don't know all the details, basically, he came back and he said, okay, we're going to compile a list. And so then my father's role was to, try to get as many people on that list. One thing, by the way, to sort of back what BOAZ said. So, I wasn't there all the time, and there are things I learned about Entebbe all the time. It's crazy. This is a story that I think I know very well, but, the same way that this woman I just told you about who got off the plane and it was a fake miscarriage, I didn't know that for 20 years or 30 years. So I wasn't there all the time. But one thing that I can tell you is I spoke Spanish too. And the terrorist who was in charge of picking who was going to be let go during this release was the terrorist we called the Peruvian. And so I spoke Spanish and I tried to free 3 people. My father, which they said no to that, and the 2 stewardesses. It was clear to me, or as a kid, why would the terrorists let go of the crew? If they were successful in their mission, they needed somebody to fly the plane. So that would be totally idiotic. They had no chance. On the other hand, here there were 2 young ladies. Other than serve coffee, which wasn't going to be available, they didn't serve any purpose. They were young. They weren't Israeli. They weren't even Jewish. And so I argued with the Peruvian, and the Peruvian answered immediately, not the crew. Not your dad, not the crew. So I don't know what else happened, but this I can tell you with certainty because I was part of this. And so then, I'm going pretty fast, skipping a lot of, things. Before I left, by the way, I have to tell you one thing. Because I was so young, actually, the terrorists trusted me more than almost anybody else. So my father put me on some missions to do certain things. So, for instance, I had to make 2 passport of 2 dual nationals disappear, people who were Israeli and something else. They wanted to get rid of their passport. So I was the only guy who could go to the bathroom without being followed to the bathroom. So I did that, and I was sent on a number of other missions. Can you check if there are other soldiers behind the terminal? One thing that happened while we were there, an important event, is that so initially we were all in one room. By the way, I forgot when I started speaking, so when I only have 2 minutes left, cut me off. Basically, I think on the 3rd day, they decided to break a hole into one of the walls and to separate, and this is a big mistake also, they separated, by and large, Israelis from non-Israelis. So again, here the message was clear. It wasn't the Jews, it was the Israelis. And there were a few exceptions. There's one guy where he was just a Greek tourist, and unluckily he had a picture of himself as a tourist in a tank. And so there were a few exceptions where people were thought to be too critical, but by and large, it was Israelis versus non-Israelis. And on the Israeli side, they booby-trapped, or they told us that they booby-trapped a whole wall. So my father asked me to go there and see how heavy the boxes were. And that's the one thing where I was unable to do so, because as I got closer, one of the terrorists saw it and said, stop me right away. The reason why I mentioned this is once my father realized that I was going to be let go, he told me, when you get to Paris, connect with the French army somehow, or ask people how to do that. And you have to give them all kinds of information. And initially, he had even taken some pictures. He wanted to hide a roll. Back then, there was no digital camera. I had a roll of pictures, which I refused. I'm not going to explain where he wanted to put that. But on the other hand, there were some papers with, pictures and diagrams probably. And my jeans were too long. And so I thought the perfect place to put them in, basically I had a very wide cuff where I would roll my jeans up. And I decided to put the papers there. So I got released. By the way, when I was released, there was one other kid from Holland who was there. And of course, we played, hijacking a plane while we were flying back to Paris. So, we took blankets and we recreated the cockpit, and we were using the words we had heard during the hostage crisis. And when I got to Paris, basically there were a bunch of journalists waiting for me, and you know how it is. This was Paradisi extraordinaire. But very quickly, there was my mom who was waiting for me. She was in tears and grabbed me. But after maybe a couple minutes, 2 guys showed up and said, look, we need your son. We're with the Israeli army. Give us your address. We need him just for a few hours. We'll give him back to you. And so, my mom was hesitant. She didn't know, but it was pretty obvious they were Israeli and they meant business. So these 2 guys took me in Renault 5, the fastest drive I ever had to go from the airport to wherever they took me. And then in that room, they asked me all kinds of questions. And I was super proud because I was able to answer all their questions, but I was even able, when you're 12 years old, people don't realize you're already pretty smart and you can already think about a bunch of things. In retrospect, there are a few things that I didn't give them. One of them, I didn't give them the confidence because I was 12 years old. 2, there are a couple things I forgot. I won't get into them. But the third thing, I'm so excited, I forget the papers in my jeans. And so when I'm done, the guys drive me back to my mother's house. My mother, as a good mother, would she take a shower, puts everything in the wash. And of course, as I'm in my shower, I have an awakening. I get back out and I'm like, stop the wash, too late. So that was a pretty big disaster. But in the end, I think it was avoided. The disaster was avoided because 24 hours later, or a little bit less than 24 hours later, there was a second wave of people who were released. And in that second wave, there was my father. And he got interviewed, I think, by the same people. I don't know if they were the same, but I suspect so. And he actually was able to, one, be a lot more confident and say, this is possible. Two, he was able to convince them that the place was, in fact, not booby-trapped. And this is something I didn't tell the Israeli army, was at night, a bunch of the terrorists and the Ugandan soldiers would sleep right above where the booby trap was supposedly there. And so he was able to convince them that that wasn't the case. The other thing that he gave them that was critical is he knew the time that the soldiers would rotate between the ones that would sleep, wake up. And there may be other things that I didn't think about. But anyway, at least the story is that he gave enough information that, basically, I think the people felt that the success of this story of intervening was more possible. The other thing that he had done that people don't talk about, but basically, after that second wave of release, the very great majority of hostages that are left back in Entebbe are Israelis. And I think this is obviously a very cynical thought, but, for the Israeli army to intervene when, you have people from every nationality and every country, and if it's a disaster, where Israel's going to end up? Whereas, here they know that, basically there were 10 people that were left that were non-Israelis. I'm not saying it would have been, but I suspect they computed that too. So anyway, I don't know if I spoke too much or
you spoke great, Olivier. You spoke great, but we do have a lot of questions a lot for you in particular. A lot of really great questions. So I'll let the team take it away with these questions and let's answer them.
Okay. So we'll get to your questions in just a few minutes. This is the time for you to continue putting your questions into that chat box, and we will get to as many as we can. Right now, I'm going to make a few announcements. So next week is our final event of the summer. We are having a book talk about this important book called The Art Spy, about Rose Valland, who was a French curator who witnessed the looting of Jewish collections in Paris and was there as they were being processed by the Nazis in the Jeu de Paume Museum. She would, they didn't know she spoke German. She understood it fluently. So she would keep track of what happened during the day in this looting operation. And then she would go home at night and write everything down. And she was instrumental to a lot of Jewish families being able to reclaim their property after World War II. So it's an amazing story, and this new book, The Art Spy, we are offering signed and inscribed copies of the book. We also have 4 copies left that are simply signed, so if you just want a signature, you can order it right away, and we'll get it out to you tomorrow. But if you want your own inscription, we'll still get it out pretty soon, but it'll be a little longer. So that's what we have upcoming next week. Then in September, we have only one program that will be on September 27th. And there we're turning to Portugal, the home of our hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, and the concept of neutrality. So what did it mean for Switzerland and Portugal and some other countries to be neutral? Were they truly neutral? So we're going to be showing a film on Portugal and World War II. And right now we're going to see a little trailer for that film.
June 1940. Portugal celebrates 800 years of existence with its jubilant population. Throughout the land, the 7 million Portuguese citizens gather to witness the official ceremonies. Portugal's strongman, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, bends to protocol without batting an eyelid. But he knows his country's independence is under threat. Portugal is but a pawn on the great power's chessboard. Indeed, the Third Reich, after conquering Poland, crushed Belgium and France. Europe was being devastated. Millions took to the roads heading south. Only Churchill still resisted Hitler. Salazar, a fascist dictator, but also Britain's historical ally, was caught between two stools. A cunning poker player, he would try to turn this weakness into a strength. His goal was to survive the war.
Okay, so now we get to your questions, and there are quite a few. So the first question is for BOAZ about your interview with Bakos. So what year was that interview? And please, can you give some examples of how you understood that the story you had thought was true was in fact not true?
It was 2009. And I have several examples. I'm not sure we have time to go through all of them. I'll give you the first one that he said. He volunteered, before I became suspicious, that this plane that they were flying was a brand new type of Airbus and was quite sophisticated. One of the first internationally to really use computers on board. And so even when they landed to refuel in Benghazi, they had to do it themselves. The folks on the ground couldn't do it. They didn't know how to refuel it. The same was in Entebbe, not just refueling, but maintenance, moving it. They had to move it from one place to another. The flight crew always had to go down and do that. They couldn't touch it. It was too complex. He's telling me this, and I'm thinking, if that's so, why would they ever offer you to leave? Didn't make sense. The other piece of information, before I started to ask my questions, that he volunteered that I found peculiar, was he boasted that the hijackers really relied on him to keep the passengers calm. Now, at the time, I believed that that was the case, that he was a leader on the ground who really was active and helping, that he was a sort of a liaison himself, much like Michel Cojot really was, you know. But I didn't know about Michel Cojot, so I thought Michel Bakos was that guy. I believed it, but I thought, again, wait a second. You're really like boasting about this. You're telling me the terrorists were aware of it. If you're keeping, and yeah, there's 250 people here. If you're keeping them calm, why would they ever let you go? It didn't make sense. So I started to ask questions. Like, for instance, here's something. And I, you know, they made a mistake when they made up the story. They really should have said that the offer was made in the second release. When they said the first release and they insisted on it, by the way, to his dying day, that was a big mistake because it's easy to shoot down. Who did they release on that Wednesday? The sick, the young, the old. 12 crew members, Air France, you've flown. Are any of them sick or old or young? I don't think so. These are able-bodied people, right? So, and on and on and on. So it became very, very clear. Of course, now we know it for a fact because we have people like Jacques Lemon officially saying, no, we will never offer this. Yes, I was knighted, but no, I didn't deserve it, right? We know it for a fact. But those pieces of information that he volunteered were shocking to me at the time.
A related question, what, if anything, has the French government's response been to the film? Have they seen it, and to the honors they bestowed on the captain? And should the honors be taken back? Have they been taken back?
The honors have not been taken back. As far as the French government watching this, I don't know. Here's what I can tell you. As I mentioned, the film is gaining a lot of traction. It's going to be, for instance, it's going to be shown all over Australia in movie theaters, as an example. It's having a theatrical run in Australia and just really, I mean, everywhere. The one place that we are getting very little traction in terms of any interest is France and really all of Europe. I've gotten tons of rejections from Europe and from France. They seem to not be interested in this film, whereas everywhere else we go, there's huge amounts of interest. So will they ever get to watch it? I don't know. I hope. It's about a French hero. They should. But they seem resistant to it so far.
Olivier,
as far as should they remove it, that question should go to Olivier. Olivier, what do you think should happen with those honors?
This is a very long time ago. Is it worth it to go through this? Look, actually, my father didn't like very much BOAZ because he felt he wasn't. So I'll give you another example of something unrelated. Once there was the separation from the Israelis and non-Israelis, my father actually went to both BOAZ and Le Moine and said, look, you're the crew. Half of you should go on the Israeli side to take care of things. By the way, for BOAZ to say that they were keeping the hostages calm, overall, everybody was calm almost all the time. There were one or two, outbursts because of stress, but, out of all the passengers, maybe there are a couple who lost it. You didn't need to control anything, or, the movies that show people running and screaming, that's just not true. Anyway, but that's a separate point. So my father asked, if half the crew would move to the Israeli side. And BOAZ said, let me think about it. I'll be back to you. And at least Le Moine answered. He said, the reality is if it starts shooting, it's going to start shooting on the Israeli side. We're not heroes. We'd rather stay on this side. And my father, being the type of guy he was, liked the Le Moine answer because it was an honest answer. And then my father went back to BOAZ a couple times, and BOAZ would say, well, we haven't had the time to discuss it internally. He had nothing to do. By the way, BOAZ, when I was there, he wasn't bad. He just didn't do anything. He laid down on the blanket that was given to him, and that's he wasn't. He only spoke French, or probably at least I never heard him speak English. So, that was that.
Yeah,
okay.
His English is very limited. Having gotten to know him, very, very limited. Hi and bye. That's about it.
Olivier, a question for you. Can you share how over the years you have emotionally processed what happened to you in Entebbe?
So, in a way, I was very lucky. So I don't think I was traumatized. Once I was out of there and once the raid happened, okay, so unfortunately a few people died. That was disastrous, but it was a great victory. It was a great story for Israel. To be honest, for me, it was a great benefit. Every time I would go to Israel, in a way, I was a hero. People asked me the story. It was more of a positive than a negative. So I've learned a lot from it. Also, I think it helped me understand how, I don't know if you recall, but the few terrorist attacks, especially hijacks, that happened after that were much more violent. Because in a way, they learned that the fact that they released hostages, that was a huge mistake. And so, I still remember one of the first hijacks. So they were very frequent back then, right? Almost one a day. There was a hijack a few days after I got back to France. And, to show that they were meaning business, they opened up a door, killed, Boaz, you probably are going to remember which hijack I'm referring to. They killed an American soldier who was not in duty, threw him out the plane, and then took off. There were but so basically that changed the way terrorists would act. And, I sort of understand why.
So, Olivier, your father had so many huge things in his life, obviously losing his own father who was killed at Auschwitz, and then his determination to murder Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, and then his role in the raid on Entebbe. Can you tell us more about your father's character? Was he always searching for some sort of purpose in his life? What kind of a person was he?
So he was a very tortured guy, very tortured guy. And, you know, at first, when I grew up young, so I knew my grandfather had died in Auschwitz, and, you know, his family, it really, his whole family, it was a pretty disastrous outcome, except for him and his mom. It was really, you know, there were Polish Jews, and but basically, we didn't talk that much about the fact that we were Jewish. But he was an extremely driven person. He was a consultant for McKinsey, very hardworking, very demanding. And, you know, after the fact, I think the people that worked with him were both, they liked him, but they were scared of him. You know, there's still people to this date, they still want to tell me that they were doing the right thing and they hope they didn't fail him. So he was a very demanding person, trying to be very rigorous. And basically, at the start of the 73 war, this really happened overnight. He read the papers. I was with him. It was a morning, and he learns about the start of the 73 war. And that day, his right hand starts hurting him a lot. And he's complaining, and things are getting worse. And it's really debilitating for him. So that he goes, sees a surgeon, they open him up, they can't understand what's going on. And finally, there's a doctor. So back then, I forget where we lived, but, you know, there's a doctor who told him, look, you should go see a shrink. You know, this is the 70s. Everything's, if it's not physical, it's psychosomatic. So he goes to New York, meets a shrink, and guess what? The shrink was Jewish. And immediately the guy says, hey, do you know the sentence in the Torah? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand go awry. And so that was a turning point in his Judaity. You know, so what's very interesting, my mother is actually not Jewish, but she was very she was pushing my dad, and she was very pro-Israel, very she wanted to fight anti-Semitism. She knew France was guilty, you know, so she was always on the right side for him. He was the guy who wasn't as engaged. And so I think when that happened, you know, some type of something changed in his mind where he had to catch up time. And I think he was unhappy in his marriage and probably unhappy at work too. Wasn't going fast enough. Very successful guy, but he, you know, too much of a fire under himself. It wasn't going fast enough. And so I think all of a sudden he felt that if he could avenge his father, it would free something for him. And so what's interesting, you know, I talked to him. So he didn't tell me beforehand his plan. I only found out about it after. But
which
what's
plan? The plan to kill Barbie.
The plan to kill Barbie.
Okay.
So, you know, at home, it was quite unstable between my parents. You know, things were quite unsettled. Plus, you know, at home, you have a guy who's super nervous, who's, you know, training to shoot guns. And, you know, it was a little bizarre, but I couldn't guess, right? But I think, you know, he was such a cerebral guy. He said this mission, and then he forgot to ask himself why, where it would get him, you know, what would happen. And so probably for a year or probably over a year, he prepares this mission, meets with Barbie, verifies his identity, makes sure he's not going to kill the wrong person, smuggles weapon into Bolivia, on and on and on. And then he holds him at gunpoint. And it's only then that he realizes, I'm going to shoot this guy. All his problems will be over in 10 seconds. It won't be justice. I'll be in a world of trouble myself, and which he always said he didn't care. And I probably, at least I think he believed so. But then it's only at that point in time that he realized justice wouldn't be served. And so he changed his mind. He came back home, and then he tried to endeavor, see if the US would extradite him. As you probably know, Barbie worked with the CIA or for the CIA and did all kinds of things. So the US wasn't too keen to extradite him. And then he went to France and tried to, there was a famous politician called Badinter who also had his father. They were in the same train. So same sweep, same everything. But Badinter, it didn't serve his political career, so he would refuse. And so he tried to do things, and he almost gave up when all of a sudden it took traction again. And so he went back at it.
Okay. Wow, this hour has flown by. We just have a few minutes left. And so I'm going to ask you each if you have some final remarks you would like to make to our audience today, starting with you, Olivier.
No, thank you. I hope, today things are much more complicated, and I wonder what, so my father passed away in 99, unfortunately. And sometimes I wonder, with the complexities of what's going on, he was a guy who really was looking for the truth in a lot of things. That was his driving thing. And, many times, even though, of course, he was in love with Israel, he knew without Israel, the Jewish people would not do as well. And, he lived it. But he was critical of Israel too. When it did the wrong thing, he wouldn't mind voicing and even writing articles and so on and so forth. And so, sometimes I wonder how he'd be today.
There's also a question about the Jews in France today. What's your feeling about the situation right now in France for Jews, since you're in France?
So I'll be honest with you. For me, where I spend time in France, I don't see it at all. And I almost, on Yom Kippur, for example, I cross Paris walking. I have a kippah on my head. I have a talit bag. I never felt threatened. Where I think France is taking a risk is basically you have all this left movement, and this is true in the US and so on and so forth. So they're uniting. So it's, socialism, wokes, and Palestinians together, right? It's not poor of the world unite or workers of the world unite, is those three unite. And what we're seeing in France is now there are towns where the legal system or the executive system is controlled by something closer to Sharia. And so to me, that's the bigger risk, is today you still have a government that tries to defend Jews. It'll try, the legal system is there to protect them. Are there some numerous, isolated cases of anti-Semitic acts? Obviously, we have that in the US. We have that around the world now, right? But today, by and large, the central government is still there to defend Jews. And where I think, there's a big risk going on is little by little, the structure itself is being infiltrated. And you see places like, the legal system or unions, for example. Today in France, the Muslim Brotherhood is actively trying to infiltrate unions. And then they put union people in some companies, and then those guys start to try to create trouble. And then there are all the laws, especially in France, the right to strike or to unionize is very, very strong. And so they really have the ability to put some businesses in trouble. And so that's a big risk from the inside.
BOAZ, let's give you the final word. What would you like to say to our audience?
Sorry we did not get to all the questions. Please, you can contact us. There's a website called tokillanazi.com, and there's a place there you can drop messages. There were some offers of assistance to set up some screenings, possibly in France. Much appreciated. Let's do it. One of the questions does lead directly to, I'll answer it now because it leads directly to one of my final comments. I was asked, why didn't I include that the Solel Bonnet blueprint was something that the Israelis used as part of the raid, since Solel Boneh, the Israeli company, had built it. Anything I put in the film, I triangulated and then triple checked and really made sure that I knew it was a fact, using primary sources. I could not establish that and still cannot for the blueprint. It may be the case and it may not be the case. There are people with inside knowledge who have told me, no, it's nonsense, urban legend, there was no such blueprint, the Israelis never built that. I didn't pursue it much further than that because ultimately it didn't make that big of a difference. Even if the Israelis had built it, so what? They needed to know, was it booby-trapped or not? Where were the Ugandan soldiers? Where were the terrorists? What were the patrols like? Where did they keep the hostages, right? Did they move them? And so, you know, once I saw that it wasn't a clear-cut fact, A, which I keep out of the film, and B, once I saw that it really wasn't that relevant, I just simply left it out. I mean, really, my job also, by the way, was never to tell the complete story of Entebbe and get into all the nitty-gritty. My job was to paint a portrait of Michel Cojot and his journey. That's what the film's about. And from what I can see, it's resonating with people all over the world. So please keep in touch with us, tokillanazi.com. I saw a question also about Texas. Yes, Austin, yes, we're coming. It will be publicized on the website when we're allowed to do so, but we're coming and hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, BOAZ DVIR, Olivier Cojot Goldberg, who's reclaimed his original Goldberg family name. And thank you to our beloved audience. Come next week for the Art Spy. If you want your own signed copy, let us know. Be well, everybody. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.